Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to present our work today, and this is a joint work with my amazing co-authors, Lauren Chambers, Deirdre Mulligan, and Abigail Jacobs. So as is a major theme of this event, a lot of calls to make technical systems more just, more trustworthy, and more accountable call for transparency and participation as key interventions. But obviously that comes with a lot of caveats. So many people have already pointed out that transparency and participation alone are not a panacea. And to understand how to enact meaningful transparency and meaningful participation, we need to look at deployments of these ideas on the ground. So taking that as inspiration, we look to a recent case study of the US Census Bureau's disclosure avoidance system. The disclosure avoidance system is the system that's used to protect the confidentiality of census respondents in the US. The census takes place every 10 years, and it's of the entire population. So over the years, the system has involved a lot of different methods for preserving privacy, and that has involved keeping all the data secret, like methods like swapping between census blocks or rounding data. And in 2020, the Census Bureau introduced a new tool into their arsenal called differential privacy. And importantly for our purposes, differential privacy, unlike the methods that came before, allowed the Census Bureau to be transparent about exactly how they were altering the data to preserve confidentiality. So that's not the case with something like swapping, where if I tell you which two census blocks I swapped, you could reverse engineer that and undo the privacy protections. For DP, that's not the case. So the Census Bureau saw this a new capacity for transparency as a major opportunity to engage with the public around the process of implementing a new technology. And in many ways, what they did aligns with what participatory AI scholars and researchers have called for. So they didn't just release the code, they incorporated education tools, they let people interact with the technology in context, and they provided avenues for feedback and change. Yet, the adoption of differential privacy ended up being really controversial. So we ask what went wrong and if there's anything that we can learn about what's missing from the research on transparency and participation. So to answer this question, we use something called the handoff model. And the handoff model, the basic idea is that if you have a system and it's trying to achieve a particular function and you replace a part of the system, even if the function is preserved, replacing those components still might change the ethical and political dimensions of the system, so the underlying values. The handoff model attends to 4 different features. So there's the function of the system. So in the case of the disclosure avoidance system, that's protecting the confidentiality of census respondents. There's the components. So what are the pieces of the system? The modes of action. So how do the pieces connect to one another? And finally, the triggers. So why did the system change in the first place? And using the handoff lens, we're able to identify 5 kind of values implicated in the shift toward differential privacy, which I won't really have the chance to get into, but we also get to see like which versions of these values are being implemented, how are they being enacted. So I encourage you to read the paper if you're interested in that, but the 5 values we identify are confidentiality, data utility, formalism, transparency, and finally participation. So I'll conclude with 3 major lessons from this case study. So the first lesson is that the handoff lens is a critical tool for surfacing values in a system. So while we're working toward more accountable and trustworthy technology, it's really critical to understand how the mere introduction of intervention, so things like making a system more transparent or more participatory, may actually alter the system's values in unintended ways. And the handoff lens allows us to reveal these values systematically. Our second lesson is beware object without experts. So researchers have advocated for a range of what we're calling objects to facilitate transparency and participation. So things like data sheets, model cards, nutrition labels, etc. And as I mentioned earlier, the Census Bureau itself invested really heavily in objects to facilitate negotiations between stakeholder groups. But these objects were ultimately in need of trusted local experts to carry them across community divides. And this isn't unique to the census case. Participation basically always entails some degree of negotiating across different perspectives. And obviously, nurturing both trust and expertise is not a trivial task, but we encourage future research in participatory AI to focus not only on artifacts, but also on the processes needed to engage them. And the final lesson that we call for is that transparency and participation should center values and policy decisions. We argue that a too narrow focus on making technical decisions visible can sometimes obscure the more important values decisions, which should ultimately be the priority of any participation efforts. And we hope that the methods that we demonstrate using the handoff model can be a template for making these values visible. Thank you.